Happy coding.
Hey there, Kevin here in the next video of our series on Intro to Web Dev. So in this sort of cluster of videos, we are learning about data. So we've learned about for loops, we've learned about arrays, and now we will learn about objects. So as always, to do that, I don't like to have a bunch of slides or anything. I'm just going to switch straight to code and start talking it through. What I have set up is just a glitch project as always. So I am back to just having an onload function or an onload callback that triggers some JavaScript that has some code that gets an output element and then outputs some text. So in this case, what is my output element? It's just a UL and oh, I see. So maybe I want this to be an LI. But either way, it doesn't really matter because I just have some JavaScript that outputs some HTML to the page. Okay, so there we go. And this is just my playground that I'm gonna build on. So let's say that I wanted to output some information about some people. So maybe like the pioneers of computer science. So I might store their data in some variables, right? I might say like let, I don't know, first name equals Ada, and then let last name equals Lovelace. Ada Lovelace was the first programmer. She is super duper interesting. I definitely recommend reading all about her. But for now, I'll just sort of use some facts about her from Wikipedia. So, what was her birth year? She was born in 1815. So let birth year equals 1815. And if you're asking yourself, wait, one of the first programmer was born in 1815? Yeah, isn't that crazy? Go look her up. But what I've got is some variables, right? And I can output these to my HTML exactly how I can anything else. So I can say like li. This string is going to get a little messy, but you know it's fine. First name plus and then a space, last name plus was born in plus birth year plus, and maybe I'll put a dot. All right, so let's see if the prettifier handles that a little better. It sort of does, sure. So it added some white space, which is fine. JavaScript doesn't care about white space, but what I'm doing is I am setting the inner HTML of my output element to this whole mess of things, which is just a string. This whole thing is a string, and it uses the append operator to like insert those variables into the string. So it's saying li, Ada, and then a space, Lovelace, was born in, birth year, dot, and then close the li. And then you have that over here. Cool. Lesson over. Go look up Ada Lovelace. Just kidding. So I could add other people, right? And the way I could do that is by, I don't know, saying like instead of saying first name, because I'm going to have multiple first names, I might say first name 1, last name 1, birth year 1, and then I'm going to change my code down here 1 1 1, and just double checking that still works. It sure does. So I could have another set of variables up here. So let first name 2 equals I don't know, let's go with Grace Hopper. She's another sort of pioneer of computer science. Let last name 2 equals Hopper. And let birth year 2 equals, I don't remember, so Grace Hopper. I should remember the like birthdays of my heroes, but you know, I have a bad memory and they don't know my birthdays either. So she was born in 1906. So again, if you're asking like, wait a second, one of the pioneers of computer science was born in 1906. Yeah, it's crazy, right? Go look her up. But anyway, I could use these variables exactly how I just used the first set. So I'm going to steal some code, which you shouldn't do, but you know, everyone does anyway. And I'll change these to 2, 2, 2. And I should have another li with, I don't. So now I'm pausing and I'm like, I assume I made a mistake. So let's open up my JavaScript console. And do I see a error message? That's not a real error message, so no. And oh, I think I see it. So what I see here is Grace Hopper was born in 1906, and that's the last thing I wrote. So that's a little suspicious. And again, writing code, like, you're going to make errors. It's fine. It's okay. But what that means is I need to like inspect the line of code I just wrote. And what I notice, what immediately pops out to me, is I have an equals sign here. So I don't want an equals, I want a plus equals here. So instead of like resetting the value of the inner HTML, I am adding to the inner HTML. So I'll, just to be on the safe side, add that here too. Won't change anything, but that sort of like, you know, makes my code a little easier. But anyway, I now output that second set of variables to my page, and that, you know, that works. That's okay. And again, chances are you've probably seen code like this. You've probably written code like this where you have like a set of variables and then later you use that set of variables, and every time you want to add something to the variables, it's just a little unwieldy, gets a little annoying, and you have to like remember, like, wait, what did I call that variable up top? Okay, I have to make sure that I call it the same thing everywhere, and you know, it's error prone and kind of annoying. So what if there was a way to not deal with that? And in the last couple of videos, we learned about some techniques. So we learned about for loops and we learned about arrays. So how would we do this with an array? Like, let's say I wanted to add a third person. How would I do that? And what I might do, based on, you know, the knowledge that we have so far, is I might have a different array for each variable. So I might have an array of first names, I might have an array of last names, and I might have an array of birth years. So let's do that. So say let first names equals a array, and I'll say this is Ada and Grace. And I'll say let last names equals love, whoops, I need a square bracket, Lovelace and Hopper. And finally, let birth years equals square brackets 1815 and 1906. Okay, so I can get rid of some of these because those are now in my arrays. So now I have 3 arrays. The first one contains the first names, the second one contains the last names, and the third one contains the birth years. So then I could write a for loop. I could do that. So I can say for, and here I am going to need my index. So I'm going to say let index equals 0, index is less than. And what do I want to do here? I want to loop for however many elements are in every array. And here I need to make an assumption that every array is going to contain the same number of values. So I'm just going to use the first array as my sort of my test here. So first names dot length and then index plus plus. So I'm going to loop over every index in first names, which happens to be every index in all of the arrays. And then in here, what I'm going to do is I'm going to delete some of this code and then steal some of it. I'm going to take the code I used to have, and I am going to sort of index into all 3 arrays. So instead of first name 1, I'm going to say first names, the name of my array, index, last names, index, and finally birth years, index. So now my arrays each contain 2 elements, one for Ada Lovelace, one for Grace Hopper, and then my for loop loops over each element in all of those arrays and outputs their elements to the HTML, and I still see the final result. So that means that if I wanted to add something or a new, person to this these arrays, I could. So let's add Alan Turing. So Alan Turing, and maybe I'll pause here and say like something weird is happening over here. So Alan Turing was born in undefined. What? Why is that happening? And that's because it's looping over the indexes in this first array. So first names has an index of 0, an index of 1, and an index of 2. And when it gets to birth years, it has an index of 0 and 1, but it doesn't have an index of 2. So you get undefined, which is just the JavaScript, placeholder for, yeah, that doesn't exist, bro. So if you see undefined, it usually means that like there's not as many elements in the array that you thought there was. In this case, it means like I just wasn't done typing. So let's look up Alan Turing, another super interesting person. There was a movie not too long ago about him. Again, I definitely recommend reading up on all these folks. He was born in 1912. So again, if you're like, wait, 1912, that feels pretty early for a pioneer of computer science. It sure does, doesn't it? But here we go. Alan Turing was born in 1912. And from here, I could add more, I could keep going. And the magic is that my for loop doesn't really change. But the problem is, like you just saw actually with the Alan Turing was born in undefined, you have to keep your multiple arrays in sync, which is just kind of annoying and error prone in the same ways that juggling all that code from before was also error prone. So this is actually like a pretty well-known technique that we're using here. This is called parallel arrays. And it means that you have a bunch of arrays that all contain the same number of elements. And based on the index, they all sort of line up. So it's Ada Lovelace, 1815, Grace Hopper, 1906, Alan Turing, 1912. These are sort of parallel arrays. And this is a technique that you can use. However, what if there was a way to do it that didn't involve juggling multiple arrays? And you guessed it, spoiler alert, there is. And this is a concept called objects. So let's see, how do I want to do this? I think probably the best way to do it is to sort of start over with one person at a time. So I'm actually going to get rid of almost all this code. And I'll change this in a second. But I want to kind of really zoom in to ignore all this. I'll come back to this stuff in a second. Because this is new syntax, so I want to kind of go slow and then explain what I'm doing. So what I want to do is create an object, which is a sort of collection of related fields. You can also have functions in the mix, but for what we're going to do, it's often going to be fields. So it's a collection of related fields that are encapsulated into a single value. So they're a little similar to arrays, but instead of having different values at different indexes, you have different fields with different names. So very similar to variables. So I'll just show you what I mean. So maybe I'll say let person 1 equals, and this is going to be Ada Lovelace. So I'm going to set this equal to an object. And to create an object, I'm going to use curly braces. And Glitch is nice enough to add the closing curly brace. So you can do it on one line, or you can add white space. It doesn't really matter. I'll do it this way. Sure. Actually, I'll do it on one line to start with. So first, name is like the name of the property, and this is not in like quotation marks or anything. And then a colon, not an equal sign, a colon, and then a string. So single quotation marks or double quotation marks, doesn't matter. Ada, and then a comma, not a semicolon, a comma, last name, colon, Lovelace, and then after the quotation mark, a comma, and then what did I call it? Birth year, and then a colon, and then this is a number, not a string, so I'm not going to add the quotation mark, and I have already forgotten. I should have just kept it up. Ada Lovelace was born in when? 1815, right? 1815. And then after the closing curly brace, I'm going to add a semicolon. So this whole thing is creating a variable, naming it person1, and then setting it equal to an object. And that object contains 3 fields: a first name field, a last name field, and a birth year field. And then I can use that object. I'm going to use that object sort of down here. And I'm going to say, I'm going to get rid of this. This is not like, this is old code related to arrays. I will bring back arrays in a second. But for now, I'm going to say person1, and I want their first name. So I'm going to say dot first name. And then the next thing is person1 dot last name. And then finally, person1 dot birth year. And let's just double check that it actually works. And sure enough, I see that my code has outputted this HTML. Ada Lovelace was born in 1815, and this is now based on this object. And I could use this concept again, sort of similar to what we did before, where let's say I want to create a second person. Well, I could do that. Let person2 equals first name is Grace, last name is Hopper, and birth year I want to say was 1906, but let's double check. Grace Hopper. Oh boy, I should just keep these tabs open. 1906. Hey, I was right. Well, it's certainly not. She's living in the future. And I could, I could do the same thing where I use my object variable. So I can say instead of person1 here, I can say person2. This is very similar to last time, where I'm just changing the values. And now I have Grace Hopper was born in 1906. And you can imagine that I could add a third object here. I could add Alan Turing back, and I could copy paste this line of code and then change it to person3. That, would work, but that's not really better than what we had before. So this is where the idea of combining everything that you've learned in the last couple of videos, for loops, arrays, and objects, starts to be really useful. So instead of having these like separate blocks of code where I'm dealing with person1, then I'm dealing with person2, I'm going to create a for loop that deals with a person. So let me delete this line of code. And here, I could start with a for loop, and I have the choice of do I start with let index? I think for now, maybe I'll go with the other way, and I'll use a for of loop. So I'll say for person, let person. I need let person of, well, I guess I need to create an array first, don't I? Great job, Kevin. I should edit that out, but I'm not going to. Okay, so first what I need to do is create an array. So I'm going to say let persons equals, and then I'm going to create an array. And Glitch is nice enough to give me the closing square bracket. So I'm going to give myself some white space. And inside of my array, the values that I want to use in my array are objects. Okay, ready? And what that looks like is this whole thing, all this syntax, I can move it into my array. And then I need a comma, because this whole thing is itself a value, in the same way that Ada is a value, in the same way that 1906 is a value, whatever. So my array contains values that are separated by commas, and this value is an object. And I'm going to do the same thing. I'm going to get Grace in there. I want to delete this. So now my persons array contains 2 objects. Okay. One object is Ada Lovelace. The second object is Grace Hopper. So now that I have that, okay, now I'm back in my for loop. Now that I remembered to actually create the array that I needed, now I can use my for of loop. So I can say for let person of persons and an opening and closing curly brace. I'm just going to put my closing curly brace here. And I need to change this this block of code. So instead of person one, now I'm going to say person. And this is person. And this is person. And now my code is back to outputting the like resulting HTML for each object. And now the power is that instead of dealing with a bunch of parallel arrays and like making sure I have them in sync, I can add another object here. So Alan Turing was born in 1912. Someone please remember that. So I'm going to have a comma after Grace Hopper, and I'm going to have another object. So I'm going to say first name, Alan. Last name is Turing. And birth year is, you won't believe this, but I already forgot, 1912. Okay, 1912. And I don't need a comma after him because he's the last one. I can add one, but it's optional. And there it is. Alan Turing was born in 1912. And I could keep going, right? I could add 100 different people to my persons array, and the rest of my code would just work. This for loop would work, which is really just like a single line of code that's creating like a messy looking string. But that's the power. I don't have to change this line of code. I could also, I can change this line of code. Like, let's say I wanted to, I don't know, wrap the first name in a bold tag, for example. I could do that, and I only have to change it in one place. I only have to change it here. Whoops, B and /B here. And I think that should make the first names bold. And yeah. And notice, like, I only had to add like one open B tag and one closing B tag. Like, I didn't have to add it in 3 different places. And if I had 100 people in my array, if I had 1,000 people in my array, I could still get away with only doing it in one place because I'm using a for loop, I'm using an array, and I'm using objects. That's like the power of all of this. Okay, so a couple of things that I want to talk about before I close out is we are now getting into like pretty involved code. And I've said a million times that making mistakes during coding is normal. You're going to make a typo. You're going to have like this symbol when you meant that symbol. It's going to happen. And you've seen me do it, and I refuse to edit it out, even though it makes me look like I don't know what I'm doing. But it's just normal. It's totally fine. So here's some common errors that you might see. So I'm going to open up my JavaScript console, and I'm just going to sort of clear out what's already there. So let's say that I don't know, I'm typing out my objects, and let's say I have an equals sign instead of a colon. What happens? And what I see is, well, first off in glitch, I see this like red dot, but I see uncaught syntax error, missing colon after property ID. And that's actually pretty self-explanatory. So good job, JavaScript. That's saying that here's a property, and wait, I wanted a colon, and you gave me an equals. And then you get other error messages because like once you get one error message, like it's all out the window. It's saying load is not defined, but that's because like while it was trying to read this function, it hit an error. So you generally only really pay attention to the first error that you see, and you fix that. So uncaught syntax error, missing colon after property ID. So that means you need to put your colon back in. Another thing, I don't know, you might have like a missing like closing curly brace. Let's see what happens if I do that. And sure enough, that's another syntax error. That's JavaScript saying like, I don't even know how to read the code that you gave me. And it's saying expected property name got open curly brace. So that's saying it got here, it got to this comma. So the next thing it was expecting was another property name because those are separated by commas. So it wanted you to say, what's the next property in this object? And instead of that, it got an open curly brace. So that's what this is saying, got open curly brace, which usually means that you didn't close out, whatever was on the line before. So we can do that. Close that out. Let's see. I've already demoed a bunch of errors just in my own coding, so I don't know how into this I need to get. But another thing you might encounter is like spelling is really important. So let's say I said like first name here, so this is a lowercase n where the other ones have uppercase N. And what will I see? I see undefined. Hopper was born in 1906. So if you see an undefined somewhere, it usually means that you're using a variable that like doesn't really exist, or you're trying to use an index in an array that, it doesn't have that many elements or something like that. Which means what you should do is like, go look at your code, go look at like, okay, what code do I use like in my HTML? I use first and then a capital N name. So let's go confirm, is that what I actually use in my array? It is here. Oh no, it's not there. It's a little contrived because you saw me do it, but these are some common errors that you'll encounter now that your code is getting more and more involved. Okay, so those are some common errors. You'll likely encounter other errors, but the process is the same, where you sort of stop coding, you look at what the error message says, you look at what your code says, and you compare that to some of the examples you've seen. And chances are it's something like a missing semicolon or a missing closing parenthesis or something, or just something spelled differently. And if you bang your head against it for like 5 minutes, hit me up and we can talk through it. And the next thing I want to talk about is the idea of like nesting objects. So we've seen objects and they can be inside of arrays, but similar to how we talked about how for loops can be inside of if statements can be inside of for loops, the same thing is true of arrays and objects. So you can have an object inside of an object. Right now, what we have is objects inside of an array. You can have an array inside of an object, all combinations, and it can like nest and nest and nest. So I don't know, what's a good example here? So let's say that I wanted to also have like a list of things that each person was known for. So I don't know, my example is getting a little messy, but let's do this, and didn't do anything. So let's give each person their own array of things they're known for. So known for, this is a property of the object. The property itself, I want to close my console because as I type, I'm going to get a bunch of errors because, I'm not done typing. So what am I known for? This is going to be an array. So this is an array that's inside of this object. I've only added it to Ada Lovelace so far, but that's fine. And in here, I'm going to add a few things. So I'm going to have like a string, and I'm going to say, I don't know, like poetry, because she was a poet. She was also involved in something called the analytical engine. Again, like, this is not really meant to get in deeply into all this stuff, but look it up. It's pretty interesting stuff. Analytical engine, and one more, cognitive science. Super interesting person. Again, definitely look them up. Can I prettify this yet? Yeah, okay, there we go. So I just clicked the pretty button. All it does is add some white space because I'm lazy. So I still have this array. I have a person's array. The first thing in my array is an object. I can tell because of the curly braces. And the way I read this code is I like sort of scan for the closing curly brace, and that tells me like, okay, that is what's related to that one object. So I've got first name, last name, birth year, and then known for, and that is itself a array. And I can do the same thing for each of these. Comma, known for, and Grace Hopper, she was known for, let's give her an array, and she's known for something called light seconds. Again, I'm not going to explain any of this. That's kind of fun for me. Bugs. She's the person who came up with the term bug in like you have a bug in your code. And compilers, right? That's another thing she came up with. And let me prettify this just to get some white space going. This is getting pretty messy. But like the messiness of the code is pretty normal. Like you will have an array which itself contains objects, which then contains arrays. Those arrays can themselves contain objects, and so on and so forth. Last but not least, let's just power through this. What was Alan Turing known for? He was known for cryptography. He was known for the Turing machine, and he was known for the imitation game. Okay, so now I have my objects. The only thing I've really done is I've added a single field to each of my objects. That field is itself an array, and those arrays contain strings. And now that I have that, let's see, I can maybe, this is going to get a little messy, but now that I'm down in my for loop, I can add another for loop actually. So inside of my for loop, I have a for loop that loops over every person. For each person, I am going to loop over everything they're known for. So I'll say like for, I want to keep going with my let. So for like, I don't know, fact of known for. And what do I want to do? Maybe first off, I will say, maybe I'll just add another li just to be lazy about it. So output element dot inner html plus equals an li. And I'm going to have a closing li, output element dot inner html plus equals closing li. And inside of that li, I just want to put the things they're known for. So I'm going to say output element dot inner html plus equals fact, and I'm going to add a space maybe. All right, so let's see what that looks for. There's a mistake. Let's see. So I need, so I said known for here. What I actually needed was person dot known for, exactly like I needed person dot first name. And now what I see is what I see. It's getting pretty messy, but I see Ada Lovelace was born in 1815, and then I see a new li. Why is that? Li. And then in there, I see my facts. Why is there an extra new line in there? I don't know if it really matters, but maybe it's just too long. No, it's not too long. So I have a closing li and then an open li. And right. Okay. So, man, I always debate how much to edit out of these videos, but this is a normal thing. This is annoying, but this is maybe not what I expected to happen, but it's because I forgot something, which is that when you append a string to inner HTML, it always keeps it, the browser always keeps it like valid HTML. So when I append a single li to it, that's not valid HTML. You can't just append an li. So it immediately closes it like automatically. And then I add a bunch of facts and then I close it, which won't do anything. So that's why it ends up looking like this. which is annoying. So the way around this is I'm going to create a separate string. So I'm going to say let facts string equals like just an empty string to start with. And I'm going to close this because it's going to get annoying. I am going to, instead of appending directly to my inner HTML, I'm going to append to my facts string. And only when I'm done, after I have it like fully created, then I am going to, oh my goodness, add the whole thing to it. So I'm going to say output element dot inner HTML plus equals facts string. All right. So now my HTML should be fully formed and okay, fine. This doesn't really matter because the point of what I'm trying to tell you is you can have like these nested objects, nested arrays that like objects can contain arrays, arrays can contain objects, objects can contain objects, arrays can contain arrays, all of the above. And your code will start to look something like this, where you have like these nested structures where I have a for loop, and then I have a for loop inside of that for loop. So I'm looping over every person, and then I'm looping over every like element in the known for array. And you know, it lets me do stuff like this, where I'm outputting the entire structure to my web page in JavaScript. So now I could add, you know, something over here. Like she was known for like her great speeches, right? And I can change it up here and it gets added to my HTML. The HTML is not super interesting, but you know, you could change this to like another UL tag or something. But the idea is that I don't have to change anything down here. I can only change it in my JavaScript, and that is fine. Okay, so that was a little messy because I forgot how inner HTML worked. But that's normal. So the last thing I want to talk about is the idea of object-oriented programming. So we won't go super far into this, but like, why are we talking about objects? Why are they important? And this is a concept that does become really important in computer science, and I think is even important for what we are doing in this sort of web development course. And if I'm being a little bit grandiose about it, I do think like kind of changes how you think about just kind of generally the world. And that is thinking about things as sort of self-encapsulated units. So to demonstrate what I mean, right now I'm just writing all of my code in like one big messy function. And instead, what I could do is, I don't know, maybe I'll write a function that returns a string for a person. So I want to give myself a bunch of white space, and I want to sort of zoom in and start typing. So I want to define a new function, and I'll call it function, I don't know, get person HTML. And I'm debating, like, do I want that? Let's go that way. And I want to take a person. And in this function, I can do whatever I want. And I can assume that I have a person. And I can also assume that a person has certain fields. I can assume they have these things: first name, last name, birth year, known for. And then based on that, I'm going to just steal all this code, which is, again, probably a bad idea, but it's what I would honestly do. So instead of output element, because I don't have access to that because of scope, which is a thing we talked about very briefly back when we were talking about functions, I'm going to create a new variable. So I'm going to say let, I don't know, person HTML equals, and I'm going to set it equal to an empty string to start with. And wherever I was doing inner HTML before, I'm going to just do person HTML, and I'm going to return person HTML. Okay, let's prettify that. So I have this function that takes a person and does something with it and returns a string. So now that I have that, I can change my code to say, I don't know, let's say let person HTML equals get person HTML of person. And then I need to change this to that. And hopefully that will work. And it does. And, you know, maybe that didn't make a ton of sense, but what this means is because we're dealing with objects, because we are using object-oriented programming, we can now like think in objects, which means when I write my for loop, I can say, okay, I have an array of persons, and for each person, what do I want to do? Well, I want to turn that person into HTML, and I'm going to write a function that does that. I don't really even care about what's inside of it. I just care that it takes a person as a parameter or an argument and gives me a string, gives me HTML. And then whatever that HTML is, I can add it to my page. And then inside of my getPersonHTML function, I don't have to care like how is this HTML being used. I don't really care because all I know is I take a person and I turn that person into HTML. So in this case, I'm going to turn it into like, you know, a couple of li tags. And this is super, super duper important. Even in like small projects, it helps you like split your code up into like, this is the section that deals with this part. This is the section that deals with that part. And it means that you're no longer writing like 1,000 lines of code that are all in one function that is really hard to debug. You can now split it up. And then even in, you know, as we get into like the actual, you know, tech industry, into software engineering and all that, this means that you can split your work up into multiple people, multiple teams. So in this example, you can say maybe one person is responsible for creating the array. Maybe another person is responsible for processing the array. And a third person is responsible for taking a single person and turning it into HTML. So you can think like if this was a group project, you can imagine splitting the work up, which makes programming now a team sport. And I'm not going to ask you to do a group project because I always hated group projects when I was a student. But this concept is super powerful. This concept of object-oriented programming, where if you can think in objects, now you can pass data around and you can draw lines in between the different parts of your code. So, you know, we won't get too far into that, but that's like a little window into like a whole world. In fact, object-oriented programming is a whole like field of study. So object-oriented programming, if you're super curious, you can read a ton more. There's, you know, not only a whole Wikipedia article on it, but there's like entire college majors based on this. But for now, all you need to remember is that you can use for loops and arrays and objects together to like deal with data, and you can now write JavaScript that processes that data and outputs some stuff to your page. And your HTML doesn't need to know ahead of time what that's going to be. In fact, your JavaScript doesn't even need to know ahead of time what it's going to be. You can get it from a user, you know, whatever you want to do. But because you're using these concepts of like for loops, arrays, objects, your code will just work. And, you know, that's pretty cool. All right, so I will stop there. In our next video, we're actually going to put all of us together into a project. But for now, I will say thanks for watching. And as always, of course, happy coding.